Salt brining versus baking soda, which your grandmother's cast iron was actually meant for. You've been told one or the other your whole life. Salt brining for rust, baking soda for buildup. But here's what nobody wants to admit. Your grandmother never actually chose between them because she was solving a completely different problem than you are. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the real answer has almost nothing to do with which powder you reach for. It has everything to do with knowing what your pan is telling you. And frankly, most of us stopped listening to that language 2 generations ago. Subscribe to this channel if you're serious about restoring what's left of your family's cookware. And drop a comment below telling me what cast iron piece sits in your kitchen right now, whether you inherited it or found it. I want to know its story. Those details matter because they tell us what your particular pan has been through. Wait, this part is critical, so give me your full attention for just a moment. The reason salt versus baking soda feels like such a pressing question is because the internet told us it was. But that's not actually how seasoning failures or pan restoration happened in your grandmother's kitchen. It's a false choice built on a misunderstanding of what went wrong in the first place. The real diagnostic work happens before you pick any treatment at all. Your grandmother lived in a time when cast iron wasn't a hobby. It was a tool. Tools get used, they get neglected. They sit wet on the back of a stove, or they get scoured with whatever was on hand, often more aggressive than today's gentler approaches. When your grandmother's skillets started showing problems, she didn't have YouTube videos telling her to mix up a salt paste or create a baking soda poultice. She had knowledge passed down from the people who cast the pans themselves. Here's what that knowledge actually looked like. Most rust and degradation issues came from 3 sources, not 1. Moisture left on the pan too long. Acidic food cooked in iron without proper seasoning thickness underneath. Tomatoes, vinegar, citrus. And third, honestly, simple neglect after a pan had been put away, forgotten in a cabinet. Your grandmother understood these differently. She didn't separate rust problems from seasoning problems the way we do now. They were symptoms of the same failure. The pan wasn't being used, and it wasn't being stored properly. The salt and the baking soda question assumes the damage is already done and you're choosing a rescue method. That assumption changes everything. Salt brining, technically speaking, creates an environment that can slow oxidation when you're storing a pan for extended periods. It's not a cleaner. It's more like insurance. Baking soda, conversely, is an alkaline abrasive. It genuinely scrubs away oxidized surface material. But here's what matters. One treats the symptom, the other treats the neglect that caused the symptom. Your grandmother's world moved differently. She used her pans several times a week, often daily. Between uses, they dried near warmth, a stove, an open kitchen. They sat in circulation. That constant movement, that regular use, that's what actually kept them alive. The seasoning wasn't something you fixed with a powder. It was something you built and maintained through cooking. Modern life interrupted that cycle. We bought non-stick pans. We put cast iron away. We forgot how to live with these tools as living things that need regular movement and heat. So when we rediscover them, in attics, at estate sales, as hand-me-downs gathering dust, they've already failed. Salt and baking soda become the question because we're starting from a place of loss. But here's where it actually gets specific. The choice between salt and baking soda depends on what you're looking at. Surface rust that's light and caught early responds to one approach. Deep oxidation where the rust has scored the metal itself, where pitting has started, that's different. Build up from years of seasoning layered incorrectly. Too thick, burned on, gummy. That's yet another problem. And each one demands a different understanding. This is where most people get lost. They think seasoning is a single layer. It isn't. It's a palimpsest. Layer upon layer of polymerized oil, built one meal at a time. one cooking season at a time. Your grandmother's pans had decades of that. When you pick up an old family skillet, you're not looking at seasoning, you're looking at history. And that history tells you what to do next. The confusion between salt and baking soda came later, honestly. It's a modern internet phenomenon, this idea that you need to choose methodically between them. What your grandmother actually did was simpler and stranger at once. She knew her pans. She could look at one and know what it needed. A good cooking, a gentle hand, time in storage with careful humidity management. She didn't troubleshoot with powders. She troubleshot with knowledge. That knowledge is still accessible to you. It's just been replaced temporarily by lists and tutorials and the assumption that restoration is about chemistry rather than observation. Understanding your pan, really studying it the way a tool user would, that changes everything about whether you reach for salt or soda or something else entirely. Understanding which approach actually fits your specific skillet right now is going to transform how you treat it going forward. So what exactly was your grandmother actually doing, and why did it work better than our modern fixes? That's what we're unpacking in the next section. Your grandmother didn't own a chemistry set, she owned observation. When she picked up a pan, she could read it like a letter. The weight told her age, the color told her condition, the texture under her fingertips told her exactly what that pan needed that day. Salt brining, the practice of rubbing a damp pan with coarse salt and scrubbing it clean, wasn't chosen because she'd read a blog post about ionic bonding. She used salt because it was in her kitchen, because it worked on the pans in front of her, and because the practice had survived in her family for good reason. Salt is mild. It doesn't strip seasoning the way modern abrasives do. It lifts stock food and rust without violence. Your grandmother understood the difference between cleaning and destroying, and most of us have forgotten it. Baking soda, on the other hand, arrived later. It became popular in mid-20th century kitchens as cleaning became more standardized, more chemical, more concerned with the idea of sterility. Baking soda is alkaline. It's stronger than salt. It can remove deeper rust and burnt-on food faster. But, and this matters, it also begins to strip away the protective seasoning layer if you're not careful. Your grandmother might have kept a box of soda for stubborn jobs, but it wasn't her first choice for regular maintenance. The problem we face today is that we've been told both methods are roughly equivalent. They are not. They solve different problems on different types of pans at different stages of use and wear. Before we continue, I need you to think about your own pan right now. Not what you've been told it needs, not what a video promised it needs. What does it actually look like when you hold it under good light? That answer changes everything about which method you should choose. Your grandmother's cast iron, the pieces that actually survived decades of real cooking, weren't preserved by following instructions. They were preserved by a woman who cooked on them almost daily. The constant use, the regular fat, the repeated heating and cooling, that maintained the seasoning far better than any restoration technique ever could. The salt brining and occasional soda scrubbing were maintenance tools for a working pan, not rescue operations for a neglected one. This is the crucial distinction we've lost. We think of cast iron seasoning as a finish to be perfected and then protected. Your grandmother thought of it as a surface that improved through use. She didn't baby her pans. She cooked on them hard. She cleaned them in ways that would make a modern restorer wince, and they got better, not worse. The salt method assumes you have a fundamentally sound pan that needs regular maintenance. You're cleaning food residue without damaging what's underneath. You're working with the seasoning, not against it. It's the choice for a pan that's actually being used, actually being heated, actually being reseasoned with every cooking session. Baking soda is for when something has gone wrong, rust spots, stuck on burnt food that won't yield to normal scrubbing. A pan that's been sitting unused long enough that the seasoning has become dull or patchy. In those cases, you need the extra chemical action. You're willing to strip a layer because you need to address a problem underneath. But here's where most people go wrong with both methods. They treat them as if they're equivalent to each other. They use baking soda on a pan that only needed salt, or they use salt on a pan that's so far gone it needs soda and possibly more serious intervention. And then they end up disappointed, thinking the method didn't work, when really, the method was just wrong for that particular situation. Your grandmother didn't have this confusion. She knew her pans individually. She'd owned them for years, sometimes decades. She could feel the difference between a pan that needed maintenance and a pan that needed rescue. That knowledge came from something we've almost completely lost. Frequency, repetition. Using the same pan, the same Dutch oven, the same ceramic pot every single day for months and years. Your grandmother didn't own 7 skillets. She owned 1 or 2, maybe 3 if her family was large, and she knew them the way you know your own hands. The salt method works beautifully on a pan that's been used regularly, that has an established seasoning layer, that just needs a light refresh between uses or after a particularly stubborn meal. It's maintenance, gentle, effective maintenance. You're not stripping anything away. You're polishing the existing work. Baking soda, though, that's intervention. That's rescue work. You use it when the seasoning has genuinely broken down, when you've got rust starting to form, when the pan has sat in a damp basement for 3 years and needs to be brought back to life. It's stronger, it removes more, and after you use it, you have work ahead of you to rebuild what you've taken away. Now, here's something important I need you to understand clearly. The Pennsylvania Dutch cooks, the women who passed down these pans through their families, they weren't thinking in terms of methods. They were thinking in terms of knowing their tools. They could look at a pan and recognize exactly what it needed, not because they'd read instructions, but because they'd used it hundreds of times. A pan that's been in steady use develops what we might call a working seasoning. It's not the kind of perfect, glassy black finish you see in online photos. It's lived in. It has patchy spots. It darkens and lightens depending on what you cooked in it last week. But it works. Food releases from it. It doesn't rust. And all it needs between uses is the salt method. A damp cloth, coarse salt, maybe 30 seconds of gentle motion. Done. The baking soda approach belongs to a different category entirely. You reach for it when you're dealing with genuine damage or serious neglect, when you're not maintaining a pan that's already in use, when you're restoring one that's been abandoned. Before we continue, let me be direct about something. Most people who ask about baking soda are actually asking about restoration. They've inherited a pan or bought one at an antique market, and it needs help. The pan isn't being used regularly. The seasoning isn't being maintained through cooking and use. So the question isn't really salt versus baking soda. The question is, how do I bring this pan back from a state of disrepair? Your grandmother's pan probably never reached that point because she used it constantly. That's the real secret sitting underneath this whole conversation about cleaning methods. The best seasoning isn't something you create through a single perfect process. It's something you build through use, through cooking in the pan, week after week, year after year. The salt method keeps that building process going smoothly. The baking soda method is what you do when the building process has stopped for too long. The distinction matters because it changes everything about how you approach your own pans. If you have a pan in regular use, and I hope you do, then the salt method is your friend. It's fast, it's gentle, it takes almost no effort. You're not fighting the pan, you're maintaining a relationship that's already working. If you have a pan that's been sitting, or that you just discovered in your mother's kitchen cabinet, or that cost you $8 at a barn sale and looks like it survived a war, then baking soda is what you need. Not because it's better, but because it's appropriate for the job at hand. Understanding that difference is what separates someone who owns cast iron from someone who truly knows how to care for it. Your grandmother would have moved between these two approaches without thinking about it, the way you switch between a whisk and a wooden spoon, depending on what you're cooking. She didn't memorize rules. She developed judgment through repetition and attention. That judgment is what we're after. Not a formula you memorize and recite. Not a flowchart you tape inside your cabinet door. What matters is knowing your pans the way a musician knows an instrument. Your hands will tell you things that no video or book can. Run your fingers across a pan that's been properly maintained. The surface feels almost like fine suede. Smooth, not sticky, not rough. If you find spots that feel gritty or pitted, those are places where the seasoning has broken down or where rust has started to take hold. That's not a failure. That's information. It's the pan talking to you. Before we continue, I need you to think about something specific. Most of us were taught to fear cast iron, to believe it requires some arcane knowledge or special permission to use. Your grandmother didn't have that fear. She had respect. She understood that the pan would tell her what it needed if she paid attention. That's not mysticism. That's craftsmanship. That's listening. The other thing your grandmother knew, and this is where I see people stumble most often, is that the choice between salt and baking soda isn't final. These aren't paths that diverge into two separate destinies. They're part of the same long conversation with your pan. You might start a skillet with the baking soda method. Spend an afternoon removing years of neglect and rust. Get it back to bare metal, seasoned fresh and ready. Then, for the next 5 years, you maintain it with salt and the occasional wipe down. Then something happens. Maybe you leave it wet too long. Maybe you cook something acidic without thinking. And suddenly it needs attention again. That's when you return to baking soda, not because you failed, but because the job has changed. I have a 12-inch Wagner skillet that belonged to my great-uncle. It's probably 80 years old. Maybe older. I use it constantly. Salt and fat clean it almost every single time. Simple, quick. But 3 years ago, I made a mistake. I left it to soak overnight with water and a bit of dish soap, a moment of stupidity I still regret. By morning, it had surface rust in a few patches. Did I panic? No. I got out the baking soda, spent maybe 45 minutes, and brought it back. Then I returned to salt and maintenance. The pan never really left me. I just adjusted what it needed. That's the secret your grandmother carried forward without naming it. Cast iron isn't fragile. It's not delicate. It's durable in a way that makes sense only if you stop treating it like a museum piece and start treating it like a tool. Tools get fixed. Tools get adjusted. Tools respond to care and neglect the way any living thing does. The real mistake people make is assuming that one method is somehow more authentic or more correct than the other. They pick salt or baking soda the way they might pick a religion, as if the choice defines them. Your grandmother would have laughed at that. She used what the moment required, nothing more, nothing less. Salt works because it's abrasive enough to remove buildup, but not so harsh that it damages the seasoning underneath. Baking soda works because it's alkaline enough to lift rust and oxidation without the aggression of a wire brush or steel wool. They're not in competition. They're tools for different jobs. That's the revelation I promised you at the beginning of this video. Not that one is better, but that the choice itself tells you something important about what your pan actually needs in that moment. Your grandmother didn't worry about choosing sides because she understood something we've lost. She knew her pans, knew them the way you know a person's moods. She could tell by touch, by sound, by how the oil moved across the surface, whether salt was the answer or if baking soda was what the moment called for. That knowledge came from doing it 1,000 times, not from reading a chart online or following someone else's opinion. Here's what that actually means for you right now. When you pick up that skillet tonight, before you reach for anything, run your finger across the cooking surface. Really feel it. Is it rough in spots, sticky, Smooth and dark, each texture is a message. Roughness and flaking, that's rust or old seasoning breaking down. Salt and a cloth will handle that. Sticky residue from old oil that's gummed up over time. Baking soda, mixed with water into a paste, is your tool. Neither choice is wrong. The wrong choice is making it without paying attention. This is where tradition and modern life actually overlap, not where they fight. Your grandmother had no choice but to pay attention. She had 1 or 2 skillets for the whole year, no replacements, no casual approach. Every decision mattered because wear and tear added up. You might have multiple pans, you might cook differently than she did, but the principle is the same. The skillet tells you what it needs. You listen, you respond. That's not old-fashioned superstition. That's practical wisdom. When you walk into an antique shop or an estate sale and you find a cast iron pan that belonged to someone 50 years ago, you're not just buying an object, you're inheriting a conversation. That pan has been through dozens of kitchen decisions, thousands of meals. The seasoning it carries is the result of someone making choices. Salt sometimes, baking soda other times, maybe neither if the pan didn't need work. Every scratch, every dark spot, every smooth patch is evidence of someone paying attention to their tools. Your job now is to continue that conversation, to add your own chapters to what that pan's previous keeper started. So what do you do this week? Pick the pan you use most often, the one your grandmother might have used, or the one you wish you'd inherited from her. Look at it with real attention. Feel the surface. Smell the metal if you have to. Rust has a distinctive smell, almost like metal and moss combined. Then decide, not because a video told you what to do, not because you're following tradition blindly, but because you looked, you noticed, and you chose the tool that your pan actually needed right then. That's the skill. That's what matters. Salt or baking soda? The question your grandmother never really asked because she already knew the answer was inside the question itself. The answer was always, pay attention. Look at what you have in front of you. Respond to it honestly. Choose salt because that pan's surface told you it needed abrasion, not because salt is fashionable or because you read it somewhere. Choose baking soda because you felt oxidation under your fingers, saw the dull spots where the seasoning had worn thin. Choose neither because the pan told you it was fine. That's mastery. That's respect for the tool and for the hands that held it before yours. Your cast iron skillet is more than cookware. It's a bridge to everyone who cooked in it before you. When you maintain it with intention, when you choose salt or baking soda or neither, because you actually looked at what the pan needed, you're not just preserving metal, you're honoring a conversation that spans generations. Make that choice this week. Pay attention. Let your pan teach you. That's the real secret. Thank you for watching all the way through. If you have an old cast iron pan at home with a story of its own, I'd love to hear what you've learned from it. Jump into the comment section and tell me. And if this video meant something to you, subscribe to the channel, hit like, and ring that notification bell so you never miss when we post again. Your kitchen's history is worth keeping alive.